All right, welcome everybody. It is the third Wednesday of the month. That means it's time for Kubernetes office hours. This is the live stream where we sit down for about an hour, take all the questions that we can from the Kubernetes Slack and try to answer them as quickly as possible to try to help you out. Those of you hanging out in the office hours channel, we'd love for you to wave to the stream. Let us know how the audio sounds and how things are going, because you know how the internet is. Like all Kubernetes events, we're going to be following the code of conduct here. We've got some rules, we've got some intros, we got a whole bunch of new participants and stuff. So I'm just going to walk you through this here real quick. First things first, before we start, let's do some quick introductions. We'll go Bob, Mario, Mike, Ralph, Val, then the Argo room.
Okay. Hi, my name is Bob Killen. I'm a research cloud administrator for the University of Michigan. I've been doing this now for, I think, about a year. My sort of specialty is Kubernetes on-prem, crazy networking setups, other things like federation, and research.
Hi, guys. My name is Mario Loria. I work for StockX, which is apparently a warehouse. I've been doing Kubernetes since 2016. My specialties are around community, ingress, networking, lately CI/CD, package management, etc. So.
Hi, my name is Ralph Bankston. I currently work for VMware, formerly of Heptio. I've been in Kubernetes since around 2016, 2017-ish. Previously, before that, worked with some Deis folks and specialize in customer reliability engineering and support. So track down hardware issues both on-prem and in the cloud.
Hey, I'm Mike Brancato. I'm a security consultant with Crow, and I've been using and deploying stuff on Kubernetes for about the last 18 months or so. And probably the areas that I use it most are really for sort of workload deployments, doing some ingress and web app hosting inside of Kubernetes.
Hi, I'm Valerie. I've been working with Kubernetes for around 2.5 years. Initially kind of like trying to get it out the door at a small company, and right now working on Lyft's like platform and provisioning team. I'm kind of a generalist. I'm mostly working upstream with SIG network and SIG scheduling right now.
Hi guys, my name is Jesse and I have Alex sitting next to me. We been around Kubernetes since around 2016 when we were both part of a startup called the Platix, which is now part of Intuit. Our Kubernetes experience is mostly around the DevOps space. So we've been building, we're part of the Argo project, and we've been building tooling around Kubernetes like the Argo workflow controller and more recently the Argo CD deployment tool.
Awesome. And those of you joining, we had some questions this morning about Argo that we'll go ahead and pass along your way. So if you have Argo questions and you're listening, this is the right stream to listen to. The Slack channel is #office-hours on slack.kates.io. If you're watching this on YouTube, follow the URL down there. Okay. And last, I'm George Castro. I'll be your host today. I'm a community manager at VMware. Before we start, though, I'd like to thank Giant Swarm, StockX, Packet, Pusher.com, Red Hat, Samsung SDS, Weaveworks, VMware, Zing, Huawei, the University of Michigan, Lyft, Argo, Crow, and the City of Ottawa, Ontario for allowing their engineers to come spend some time with us and answer questions with the community. So thanks to that. Quick ground rules before we start. Judgment-free zone, so there are no stupid questions. So in the Slack channel, we like to be supportive of each other. So if someone isn't like getting it, we do our best to try to help people get to where they need to be. So let's try to keep that positive. Also, we'll do our best to answer your questions, but we don't have access to like your cluster and things like that. So we consider questions about live debugging and stuff kind of off topic. But what we will try to do is try to get you to where you need to be to try to figure out what your problem is. Panelists, you're encouraged to expand on your answers with your experiences, your pro tips. Any production experience that you can share with the audience is always welcome. Audience, you can help us out by pasting URLs to the official docs, blogs, GitHub repos, anything that might be useful about what we're talking about. those will get scrolled on the side in the chat. And what I do at the end of every session is grab all the URLs for that session and I whack them in the show notes so that people can refer to that stuff. So you can really help us out. If someone is recommending a tool and you're familiar with the space, feel free to just throw them all in there. That works. I will be posting this in our question thread on discuss.kubernetes.io, which Bob will paste the thread URL in the chat for those of you who don't have access to Slack or want to post a question ahead of time for next time. You can also help us out by tweeting, spreading the word, paying it forward. One of the things we like to do is if you're hanging out and you feel like you want to help in Kubernetes and don't really know how to, you can always volunteer to be on this panel. This is all volunteers. It's an hour a month commitment. You don't even have to come every time. It's just a fun way to kind of hang out and help people out. So with that, those of you that ask your questions live in the channel today, you will automatically be submitted into our little raffle, and then we give away Kubernetes t-shirts at the end. So one of you will win a Kubernetes t-shirt. Not this one, but similar to this one. There will be a wheel and a blue thing on it. And with that, panel, are you ready? All right. So I am moving over to the notes document, and we're going to start. Is this the first one here, Bob, from Deng Deng? Are you nodding?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. All right. So first question comes from Deng Deng. It says, hi, all. Just getting into Kubernetes and would like to get some comments in designing an architecture. Context is that I have 3 local servers and would like to run TensorFlow serving on them. From what I've read so far, my thought is to have Kubernetes cluster via Kubespray and set up each server as both master and worker. Is this making sense? Thank you in advance. Who wants to go first? Mike is starting to smile. Val is also starting to smile. I don't know who wants
I was going to pass the ball to Bob.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just rereading the question about their deployment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nothing that they said sounded bad at all. The only thing I heard that was lacking there was they didn't really elaborate on their networking, but that would be my only thought if I was discussing this in person, was to ask what they intend to do for networking.
Yeah. My only other suggestion would be to if you do have another server, something that's smaller that can essentially host your control plane services, that'd be great. You generally don't want to run intensive workloads on the same node as your control plane services. Other than that, the whole idea of TensorFlow serving all of them, that works great. If you're looking to do more inference and other training, definitely take a look at Kubeflow, because that will have sort of the whole pipeline sort of baked into it and happens to be powered by Argo.
I'll definitely second what Bob said around trying to segment the Kubernetes control plane away from your data workflows. Even though you have resource segmentation in terms of CPU and memory, you can still have heavy things like I/O and failure domains where your workloads will start messing up the ability of the cluster to do its job.
Is it too strong to say that in production you should always run a separate control plane?
I'd probably use the word should, yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen some edge cases where people are at the edge with a small, single node cluster. They're doing something, but that's sort of the extent of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other comments on this? It feels like 3 servers with kubeadmin or Kubespray would be a fine, set it up.
Yeah, definitely not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kubespray now defaults to kubeadmin, George.
Oh, ding. All right, one more. All right, you can't go wrong with that one then.
It still uses Ansible to sort of orchestrate and do all the other heavy lifting.
Mm-hmm. And then I think we should definitely get Antoine or one of the Kubespray folks on this. All right, any other comments then on a 3-node TensorFlow setup? All right, this one is really long, so I'm just going to paste it in the channel while I read it on. This is from Gavin Klinger, cloud computing and microservice researcher at UC Berkeley's NetSys lab. In our research, we assume that microservices are configured independently despite being a single component in a larger application. These configurations might include the max number of requests or request backup time. We are interested in identifying cases where the independence assumption breaks down, resulting in unexpected interactions, as in cascading failures between different microservices. For example, Target runs logging sidecars with all of its applications, When Kafka became semi-unresponsive due to intermittent network connectivity, all of these logging sidecars woke up and began to use CPU time, and the resulting high load on the Docker demos caused containers to say they were unhealthy, and then that overwhelmed console, and then when Vault found out it could no longer communicate with console, it sealed itself, and then he's got a link to the details there. We'd love to talk about your experiences working through issues like this in your deployment, and the target thing that he's talking about. I will grab that URL because we used that this morning. Sorry, that was a mouthful. Any comments on this panel?
I can start. I was going to say that a lot of times, in my experience working with a lot of different customers, even going into the microservices approach, the independence of those microservices is not as great as most people assume. So taking out and doing random, we're just going to dev null all of this traffic for this specific service is probably a good way to start verifying independence issues that I see quite often. I've seen it in both Ruby and PHP, where I've spent a lot of time.
Another thing that can happen is when you decide to kind of change or rotate independent containers. For example, if you have a sidecar and you want to push out an update to that sidecar across everything, you are technically making some changes to other pods in that container. So for example, say if your image disappears from a registry for some reason, or the latest image changes and you're using the latest tag, you can wind up with like a totally separate problem from what you're actually updating.
I've also seen other sort of random sort of cascading failures, mostly centered around Java. And up until recently, it didn't pay attention to like memory C groups or things like that. It's come up a couple times in previous office hours. There's a good article out there by Red Hat on sort of what you need to set and configure to get Java working in a container right if you are not on Java 10.
Yeah, and I believe I just saw something scroll by about Java 12. I know that's only semi-related, but it feels like we have to kind of start keeping track of all the container improvements in Java, because someone's always ends up asking a question about the resource thing.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to with what Simon was just saying about microservices and dependencies there. You have to think about that when you design your app. And I think the 12-factor app, the methodologies behind modern microservices kind of pushed through by Heroku, I think it's 12factorapp.com, really outlines the kinds of things that your app should and shouldn't worry about when it's deployed in this kind of environment. So think about those things, as well as what the others said with isolation. And also, a lot of this, he talks about kind of networking and backoffs and retries and things like that. And I would definitely look at service mesh if you want to really understand what's going on a per microservice level and control that traffic. So that's going to be one of your best bets. We're looking at doing that here at my organization as well to really understand our workloads and the platform overall. So, and when there's cascading failures. So today we had an instance where it took us 15 minutes to try to follow the path, the chain, to really find out what the core problem was. And it was 4 microservices deep. So definitely issues as people try to run distributed applications like this. So.
Mike, Valerie, or Jesse, any comments on this one? Jesse's room, if I may say.
No comments from here. Sorry.
All right.
I guess sorry, go ahead, go for it.
I was just going to say, I don't really have much of a comment, but I will repeat that I haven't seen that just simply throwing stuff into a microservices architecture would cause independence. It gives you greater control over the individual or discrete components that you would sort of more traditionally find in sort of monolithic type applications or systems.
This is a very deep topic, so I will only touch the surface, but usually with microservice architecture, it can help to be what's called event-driven. So you have some kind of a stream or hub, often like built on Kafka, where services are emitting events and other services are consuming that. So instead of having like a full tree of service A calls B, calls C, calls D, you have one broker handling all of the communications. So your like golden path flow can still depend on everything being up, but there's far less chance of cascading or like an operation being blocked entirely because something in the tree failed to respond.
Okay, and with that, we have a new panelist. Josh, quickly introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Josh Burkus. I spend most of my time on SIG release, so any questions about the release team or how we produce releases, etc. Also, my hobbies are Kubernetes with storage and databases and stateful applications, so I can field a few questions around that.
Awesome, awesome. All right, moving on. Anything else to say about microservices? I know that was like a very generic question, but I
actually have one last thing, because
Sure.
I mentioned this in the discuss thread where the question was originally asked, was take a look at all the chaos engineering work. If you're looking for cascading failures and how to deal with like all sorts of other random failures, there's lots of good articles and things like that on this sort of stuff there.
Sweet. Thanks, Bob. All right, moving on. Adam Harrison Fuller asks, hey, all, if the Argo people are going to be here, you are. Our team has a few questions for you. This is like a four-parter here. What benefits do we get from running the HA variant of Argo CD?
Sure. So essentially, we run multiple replicas of the various services that comprise Argo CD. The main benefit that you'll get is that we do have a throwaway Redis cache that we store lightweight metadata about basically everything that you see in the tree view in the UI. That's coming from the Redis cache. And so when that cache goes away for the single node, a single Redis version of Argo CD, we have to rebuild that, which takes not too long, but it just you're going to have some disruption. Also, when node upgrades happen, at least with the HA variant, you don't have downtime. So yeah, we run the HA version of Argo CD for that very purpose.
Sweet. Next question is deploying your core cluster resources, namespaces, etc. via Argo CD a common paradigm?
So we don't have an opinion on this. For example, actually, when we provision clusters, there's all of the add-ons that get into the cluster are actually not managed by Argo CD, and Argo CD is more for the end developers. So some of the core controllers and stuff that are part of the our distribution of Kubernetes that we run, those are not provisioned using Argo CD. There's kind of talks whether or not we should be, but at this point in time, those are just part of the distribution.
Sure. And part 3, how does Argo defend against moving repos, deleting repos, and unreachable repos, that sort of thing?
Sure. If you lose or change a repo, all that means is that you won't be able to deploy anymore. So what would happen is that you would need to update the app spec to point to the new location of the repo. You can still delete apps. You can still see the health stat, like monitor, look at the health tree of the app and click around on the UI. That all still works. It's just you can't deploy. And the last, unreachable repos. We do notify when a repo, we can't render the manifest from that repo, and there'll be an error condition on that app.
Sure. And then the last bit, which I'll open up to the audience as well, those of you using it and the panel. What's the production readiness of Argo CD? Who's
Sure.
using this in anger?
So we run Argo CD in production. We have over, I'm guessing, 1,300 applications deployed using Argo CD. We run about maybe 24 Argo CD instances for different teams and business units. And yeah, so basically we are running it full in production, and we have a lot of the, just with our last release, we put in a lot of monitoring metrics to understand when things are going wrong and stuff too. So,
Anybody else have comments on Argoness? Pam? Slack channel, feel free to keep on typing. I see people typing. And then we will catch up on questions here in a minute. We did change the office hours to the ultra low latency mode in YouTube, so hopefully the delay isn't as bad. I think it was like 30 seconds this morning. So sometimes the internet is delayed for us. So while we wait on people to give their opinions, if they have them, we are going to do with Eve C's question first. And then let me look at the channel. Dan B will be after that. Dan Duval will be after that. And then Simon will be after that again. All right. This might end up being more of a Linux question than Kate's. We're monitoring container file system usage with cAdvisor metrics. You know what? Time to paste this one. So I'm going to paste this one in the channel here. So it looks like he's looking at the pod mounted under /AT cloud. This is an empty dir. And he's looking at the volume stats. It states that this particular empty dir volume is 1.7 megabytes, which is exactly what he sees. I'm not sure exactly how this metric is collected and where that volume is coming from. But it looks like he's trying to get the empty dir file size on that device. But it looks like cAdvisor's saying it's 150 megs, but he only sees 1.7 megs. Am I reading that right?
I don't know. This seems like a cAdvisor thing. I mean, it might very well be some sort of bug in how it's trying to report.
I'm going to throw out a guess, which is that it might be counting the image file system or something, but I can't say for sure.
The other thing could be like inode exhaustion or something like that.
Hmm.
Well, no, that would mean that you couldn't write to it, still report as less. I'm sorry, disregard that.
Any other ideas?
I would tell him to open an issue, possibly. Maybe not with cAdvisor at first, maybe in Kubernetes, and just see if someone can kind of weigh in. So,
Okay.
I might also have him like look at issues both in Kubernetes and in cAdvisor, just see if there's people that have maybe kind of run into some of the weirdness like this. I'm sure there's someone consuming metrics like this that has seen something possibly. So,
sure. Okay, and at this point, we've caught on to the live questions, so I'm just going to start reading them from the channel in order. If it looks like I've skipped you, audience, don't hesitate to just repeat yourself with all caps. Feel free to yell at me. It's fine. All right, Dan B's question is going to be first. Wait, make sure it's Dan B's question first. Yep. Can anyone point me to audit policy files that isn't the GCE script that is frequently referenced? Does anyone have tools for validating a cluster, i.e. has X and Y daemon sets, config maps, etc.? Mario, looks like you started to answer this question. If you want.
Yeah, I mean, I have no clue on the part one of that. Part two, I can answer, and that we kind of just did this for our CD, where we want to validate as much as possible before we go to deploy. And so we have Helm. So with Helm, we're able to basically do a Helm lint and verify that our chart is where it should be. And then right after that, we do use a GitHub tool that's not tied with Kubernetes. It's an independent person who started it called Kubeval that does a great job of basically we run a Helm template, we build out the deployment, all the objects are built out and then sent to Kubeval, and it verifies that they are valid before we send them to Kubernetes for loading in. So I would highly recommend that. And then obviously Heptio Sonobui for conformance of overall cluster, et cetera. Not, what I'm talking about is really just the applications themselves and the objects, but not the cluster overall. So I don't know much about other, total cluster environment or best of and best practices for, verifying masters and things like that outside of Sonobui. If anyone knows of any other tools and things along those lines, I would be interested to hear those as well. So.
I would add that this is actually where I feel GitOps plays an important role in which your infrastructure as code, like what you want to be running in the cluster, is actually recorded somewhere in like a Git repository. And tools like Flux and Argo C help facilitate those that you're in sync of what you expect. So that would be my recommendation, is to use some kind of form of GitOps to verify that you're running what you expect to be running.
Yeah, I would second that. Basically, the way that would work is there would be some sort of cluster diff that you would use to diff the expected versus what is actually deployed, and you would probably look at certain properties of things like deployments and services to make sure that they are actually deployed with what's expected, while ignoring the things like the unique names, et cetera, of things which are actually deployed from a deployment, like pod names, et cetera.
Anyone else on validating?
My suggestion was going to be Sonobuoy.
That is also mine.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Two-part question from Dan Duval. Thanks for joining us, Dan. I'm checking out Tecton CRDs for running general build tests of CD-type workloads as part of a future CI system we're setting up and building out. What's the best way to surface more information from CRDs? It's not clear to me whether it's possible or preferable to expand the existing K8s dashboard with views into CRD objects or to develop a specialized dashboard that runs within the cluster. Is it possible to expand the stock Kubernetes dashboard?
And of course, Jeff isn't on this call.
Yeah, the one time the dashboard person isn't here.
Yeah. Currently, you cannot extend the dashboard. However, there is, I don't know if it's a KEP yet, but I know there's a plan to try and add a plugin mechanism where you can do that. In general, though, I'm saying this sort of against Jeff, I would avoid, although realistically he'd probably agree with me, I would avoid actually running and using the dashboard. It is more meant as an ad hoc admin-y type thing. I definitely would not use it day to day.
Just to kind of give context to that, there's definitely some like usability lacking in it, and the way it's designed has security flaws because it's running as an escalated user. So there's periodically issues where the dashboard can let a user who's meant to be low permission do something that is very critical.
I want to say I do actually run it for in kind of a read-only capacity for private clusters that are very limited in access because it does give me a good visual representation of certain things and what's going on a little bit faster than kubectl can, depending on what I'm looking at, et cetera. So, but yeah, I do agree with Valerie and Bob on that.
So actually, we our Argo CD actually has we wanted a dashboard-like experience. So Argo CD does have a way to I guess assess the health of CRD. So it's implemented using like a Lua script. So a user can basically put in a config map a snippet of Lua script to kind of say, okay, this certificate or issue or from a certain manager, it's healthy when status dot something something has this field is true. So we actually part of Argo CD was actually to build like a dashboard-like experience, but with security in mind. So that's also one plug that I'll make for Argo CD.
Mm-hmm. Any other ways to get insight into CRDs? Trying to answer the first part of his question. All right, we'll move on. Dan, if you have follow-up questions, feel free, or there's something that you want us to dive deeper into, just keep on typing a follow-up and then we'll get to it. Next up comes Simon. Welcome back, Simon. Says, when should we start looking at gRPC? We're building everything in Node.js right now and got both MongoDB and Redis and HA, but should we, for example, gRPC between services instead of pub/sub?
I think it depends on your use case. Pub/sub and gRPC are both very different models. Pub/sub is meant to be asynchronous with something else handling the connection, and gRPC is just one way to have one service directly talking to another.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, this seems very specific to how you guys build your applications. Definitely two different models, and really, if the pub/sub model is working for you, there's not really a reason to switch. Like, gRPC isn't just better, because it exists and because it's ready to go, et cetera, right? So, don't be wary of things that seem like they're so much better and like you're going to really get much more value when really this is just going to be probably a lot of time for your team, et cetera. But again, this is something that you'd want to review, maybe play with a little bit and see if it works with your developers. So
at the end of the day, your service connectivity is just plumbing.
Yeah. So we use gRPC extensively, and where I find it's actually really useful is so a lot of times when you think something could be a library or a separate microservice, gRP actually helps make that decision less important, because it makes, generating the client code and stuff, that all that stuff that they do for you, makes the decision between whether something should be a library or a separate microservice really like not as relevant as it used to be. I think it's been it's slowly maturing. Like, we had a lot of Argo CD is using gRPC, and we had a lot of issue with Ingress, because some of the Ingress controllers don't have full support for gRPC. Like, for example, Amazon ALBs don't have the full support for HTTP2. So right now we have to run with service type load balancer to get to run Argo CD behind that. So it's a mixed bag, but I think I think we made the right decision, and I think it's just going to improve.
Okay. Any other comments on gRPC? We're about halfway through. Those of us joining on YouTube, feel free to join the Slack channel. It's down below. It's #office-hours on the Kubernetes Slack. That's slack.k8s.io. Moving on, we have another question from Simon. Says, how are you authenticating services for internal traffic? We're thinking of using an IDP that issues JWTs based on service account deployments with correct scopes, but would like to know what you think is the best/easiest way.
I think I missed that.
Yep, I'll go ahead and repost it in chat here.
Okay.
Boom. Just give everyone a second. With 7 people here, I'm like really trying to find a question that stumps all 7 of you. That might be hard for me.
Okay. So authenticating internal traffic, are you thinking like, the most common thing I've seen is something like Istio, where you're doing like MTLS auth between your application, between your pods.
Yeah, what he's talking about with JWT seems a little bit excessive. I would say like definitely do this sort of authentication between services, but beyond that, I don't know if you need much. There's got to be some definition of trust inside of the cluster, and if there isn't, then maybe there's some other issues going on, or that's something that you should look at. But I think it depends on the services. It depends on what you're running. You could be running things in a multi-tenant environment, which definitely changes things, etc. So I guess it really depends, but you definitely don't need to treat it like this is a over the internet service with possible untrusted clients per se, right? Depending.
They are using MTLS currently.
Yeah, if it's just purely internal and you are sort of doing all the normal best practices of sort of namespacing your apps and your components and using network policies, etc., I wouldn't be too concerned with that. But it's something that I commonly sort of run into a similar issue here with, is really reaching out to excuse me, external services where you would need to do that, where you might need an identity from the application itself and need to assert that identity. They may be still considering those. I mean, generally those are outside of a cluster, but they could be in a separate namespace that you do treat differently, in which case their approach there doesn't sound terrible. There is something inside of Kubernetes that, or what's the CNCF type tool that could help with that?
Spiffy?
The Spiffy, yep. And where you could generate an ID and hand that off. And, even if you needed to use that ID to collect secrets to connect to something that just has just sort of password or key-based support, you could use that as well with something like Vault. But you get a lot more opportunities to assert your identity once you have an identity for that pod, and can then use that for authenticating to both internal or external services.
Okay. Anybody else have an opinion on this one? Awesome. Joel Davis, thanks for joining, says, sorry if this has been asked before, but I seem to remember earlier iterations of deployment objects not needing the selector/match label stuff. I was wondering what the motivation for adding that as a required part of the deployment was.
I don't remember that we ever didn't require those.
I think initial deployments didn't. I remember reading this in the docs. Actually, that it was, I forget, 1.8.
How did you direct a service to a pod then without those?
I think, didn't it automatically add the one single label to use in selector? Like, I think the owner reference thing was missing for a while, but
I think at one point it was auto-populating the spec template metadata labels with, if you omitted that, I think it would then pop. Yeah, the deployment would.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
The problem was we learned about it because someone tried to change deployment labels and failed because of it's impossible to change labels, pod selector labels. So,
Yeah, so those are immutable now.
Yeah, yes, and that's the problem. That's why I think this was separated.
Yeah, I think they wanted basically the user to be explicitly deciding those things because it became immutable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for that matter, I mean, the other reason to actually require those things and to have them is that you can do all kinds of fun things with services when the labels match, say, more than one pod.
Yeah.
That you couldn't do if it was implied.
Alrighty. Anything else on this one?
I'm trying to find the docs that kind of.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Just whack the URL.
Yeah, we'll do.
I'll get to it. People are tossing in some links. Macintosh Prime is tossing in some useful links here for Cube Hunter and Cube Bench, both from Aqua Security. Thanks for those. And then moving on, Chapman, welcome, says, is exposing the API server endpoints itself a vulnerability? If not, what's the worst an attacker could do with an exposed API server endpoint on a patched Kubernetes instance?
Denial of service is the first thing that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the worst they could do is find an undocumented exploit and take over your API server, which means they've taken over your cluster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's exceedingly high risk, even if it's not very likely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is like the API server is like databases in terms of, yes, we put a lot of work into making that secure, but we have to juggle that with the priorities of also making it efficient, making it speedy, and offering lots and lots of features, which means it's never going to be as secure as something like network hardware or network software that can prioritize security over everything else. So that's why you don't want to expose it. For the same reason you don't want to expose, say, your MySQL port to the whole internet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would add to that, as with any service that's on the internet, you want to have the correct controls around that's needed. So just because we say, well, it's best practice maybe not to have that accessible anywhere on the internet, that doesn't mean it can't be on the internet. Maybe you limit access to certain blocks of IPs, et cetera. And I'll also add that there's some cloud-based, Kubernetes providers where they run clusters for you, and even with their private clusters, the server API is still publicly available on the internet. So take that how you want, but there's definitely a lot of people running the server APIs on the internet today.
And Simon wants to add, did you see that AWS now makes it possible to lock down API access to a VPC? I know it's not supported with AKS. Does anybody know if it's possible with GKE?
Yeah, you can specify CIDRs that are allowed to connect to it, including like manually whitelisting your Office IP and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't their identity proxy thing also have integration for that now?
I believe so, but I haven't used that.
Okay. Anything else on exposing your API, your control plane to the internet?
I think the summary is please don't if you can help it.
Yes. All right. Thanks for the question, Chapman. Moving on, we have Christian Roy. Welcome back. Is it possible to use local node persistent volume with a stateful set?
Yes. The only thing is that if you are using the local volume provision and all that, essentially you are binding it to that node. But I guess that's sort of the expected behavior for that. Just remember to account for that if you have to put the node in maintenance.
Oh, passing cat.
Yeah, new panelist.
Yeah, I would actually say one of the main reasons for creating persistent local volume as a thing was to support database workloads. So absolutely, it's possible.
Just give me 1 second. I'm just reminding Kubernetes users that they can hop on over if you want to join to the live stream if they want to answer their questions.
You can go back to the earlier question by Nick.
That was going to be my plan. So Nick actually asked us this morning, and we had Ilya here talking a little bit about GitOps from his perspective. So those of you listening, the session from this morning, that should be the YouTube video before this one, we had the panel talk about GitOps and you know the kind of tools that they're using and best practices. So check that out. But I wanted to also ask a question to this panel as well. So Nick is asking, thoughts on GitOps? Anyone doing it? Anyone experienced any drawbacks? This essentially means having an in-cluster code, Argo CD, etc., which monitors for Git events and pulls in changes rather than the traditional push approach from external pipelines. We're looking at Argo CD plus customize to do everything, i.e. bootstrapping the cluster too, namespaces, network volley, resource quota. Is that something people do? And we did talk a little bit about Weave. Flux, is it? Oh man, I just totally mixed up my Weave things. So I just wanted to get the opinion from this panel.
I'm missing my +1 sticker, but yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not something I'm doing, but it's definitely something I'm trying to work towards. And yes, Weave Flux, I believe, is the tool you were correctly mentioning.
Yeah. So with GitOps, I think you can have push or pull based approach from external pipelines. So if you want it completely pull based, basically somehow you're affecting a change in Git, where that in my opinion, that still can be done through the pipeline. And in fact, that's what we do here. But as long as somehow you get this Git change into Git, and then you have the Flux or Argo CD just automatically monitoring that Git repo and then pulling in that change. But it still can be the push model, because the only thing that's changed is instead of doing something like a kubectl apply, you're now doing a git add, git commit, git push. And so it's in that sense, it's still a push-based model, except for the fact it's going one in direction to get it into the cluster.
I have follow-up questions, but I'm going to give other people a chance to answer if you want. So one of the things we were kind of discussing this morning, I don't want to say give me your top 3 problems that you see, but usually people that are trying to get to this model, what are the gotchas that just everybody gets snagged up on? Ilya this morning mentioned secrets could be a challenge for people.
Yeah.
Thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely secrets is probably the biggest problem. We actually don't manage secrets here. Like, we have a separate service, centralized service that where we get our secrets from. But I think my opinion, I think that the solution that I like the best is actually was Customize 1 secret generator, which got pulled out of Customize 2. And might be, I think, is coming back as a plugin mechanism in Customize 2. But with the secret approach that Customize 2 does, and actually Customize 1, is that you can have some arbitrary script or something call out to get the secret value in whatever secure way that you can come up with. I personally like that approach the best. The issue I have with sealed secrets is that if for whatever reason you've lost the or you your secret key got exposed, your Git history will have the entire history of all your secrets. So if you ever reuse those things, and then you're kind of screwed. So right now, I like Customized's approach with secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, lots of Helm charts or even controllers handle resources in a way so you can never make them in sync with your Git repo.
Oh yes.
An example is, let's say you have a resource which has a field which cannot be null, but your Helm chart set the null value for that field. And if you try to push it into Kubernetes, then controller would immediately maybe remove that field to replace it with the string, like empty string. Mm-hmm. And if you try to run kubectl diff, you will see the difference right after kubectl applied.
Yeah, the one problem is your manifests kind of have to be pretty pristine and correct. Otherwise, when you eventually apply these manifests to Kubernetes, with whatever controller drops those unknown fields, and you're just like in this out of sync state. And so like I've been kind of contributing a lot of Helm chart fixes, because when a lot of fields, like, they just don't plain exist in that object, I've been just kind of trying to fix those things so that our users kind of have a good experience when they're trying to deploy Helm charts from using Argo CD. Mm-hmm. That is a big issue.
Anything else on GitOps? Because the questions are starting to pile up, and we're down to 12 minutes.
Yeah, I did put a link to the customized secret generator plugin.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Bob. Simon asks, continuation on the authentication question. Let's say I want to authenticate all traffic between services. What's the recommended way for IDP to identify the pod's ID? Assume we're using Istio with MTLS, but need my IDP code to know for sure the traffic is from that specific service. Mario, looks like you were answering this one.
No, I was answering the security one, actually, a little bit. Sorry. I was talking more about how to handle secrets and whatnot.
I meant scrolling up to Simon's question. You say query the service object representing those pods.
Well, so I don't know how he's doing authentication. I don't know, ideally, like, he shouldn't be talking to pods directly. I don't know. It depends on how the applications are running in this cluster, right? So when a new pod spawns, what happens, right? Does that individual pod need to be authenticated? And if so, then yeah, he needs a mechanism to learn its IP address so that it can be authenticated from X other service that's running. But that sounds a little bit gross to me. Really, like, if you're gonna do it, yeah, you need to verify each instance that's running. Although, I'd argue that instead, the application that's maybe talking to the service looks for some unique key or asks for some sort of something, so it can still use the service endpoint instead of querying a pod directly. That just isn't really a model that works with what Kubernetes is meant to do, right? So, that's my 2 cents. Again, I don't know a lot about authenticating inter-app connections and whatnot. That's not something I've really actively done. So it really depends on what he's going for, the nature of the applications, how they verify each other, things like that. So,
anyone else have an opinion on this one?
Yeah, I think the scope here is probably out of Kubernetes, but it sounds like that they want some sort of way to provide identity to every single pod and have use those identities and services. And it would be like building any other identity verification system. They're going to have their backend user store, and they literally have, a number of things they can choose from, to authenticate. So it's probably not best to provide or to opine on what that might be.
Yeah. I have seen this come up in relation to Spiffy. I know we talked about it a little bit earlier. I would say just start looking at that and see if that covers your use case, specifically Spiffy and Spire.
Yeah, Spiffy and Spire, they provide lots of these things. They provide the tooling around how to do it. So, but you'll still have all kinds of options even inside of that.
Okay, he chimed in. I want Service A to get a token to communicate with Service B. What is the best way inside of case to validate that a pod in Service A, for example?
This might be a Vault thing then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that realm.
Well, even still there, you could use an SVID from Spiffy to authenticate to Vault to grab your secret. So you can do all that stuff.
All right. Any other comments? Simon says Vault can't identify what pod it is. Chew on that one for a second. I want to address Drew's question, and then we'll get to Simon here while we digest. Drew asks, I'm integrating a third-party plugin, an F5 container connector that uses Flannel VXLAN. In my deployment, my nodes are missing the required annotations, VTEP MAC / public IP. My environment appears to be running just fine with the exception of these annotations missing. Are these something that can be manually added, or would there be a reason they weren't added to begin with?
I don't know enough about Flannel's install process and all of that. Maybe more information needed a little bit too. How was the cluster? How did it come into existence?
Anybody else?
It does seem a little bit unusual that the annotations are missing, but no behavior is seemingly dependent on them. I would definitely try to check with like the Flannel docs or someone more specialized in Flannel specifically.
Okay. Anybody else?
Someone actually had another question on Windows.
Oh, yeah. That's going back to Simon. Do we continue with this existing question, or actually let's talk about Windows for a little bit, because I know that's coming in 1.14. I don't know if that will apply here, but anyone using Windows to develop microservices in Kubernetes, we're struggling with minimizing the dev loop since tools like telepresence doesn't work that well on Windows. Probably wouldn't hurt. I took down an item. Maybe we can grab Craig and Michael and have like a Windows specific office hours or something.
That would actually probably be a great idea.
Yeah. That I find that a lot of Windows is kind of like new in the Kubernetes world. So like I haven't even seen it work yet. But that is coming in 1.14. Any y'all using Windows at all? Just out of curiosity. All right. Linux forever. Okay, moving on. Drew, if you have any more information, feel free to just post a follow-up or whatever. Simon goes on to say that Vault can't identify what pod it is, only the service account. And then Mike, you started to talk about SVIDs. Can you talk about these real quick?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert, but Spiffy has they're working on a second, but the one format is X509 based. To allow identification that can then be passed off to services such as Vault or outside database services or user stores to authenticate a pod. And then he actually followed up and said that that requires, I guess, a feature set change on and can't do that on AKS or feature flag. So a workaround that I've used in the past has been to use something called Kubernetes Vault, I believe, or Vault Kubernetes. I can't remember, but it's on GitHub. But basically, the way it works is there's a init container that runs, and there's a service that runs in the cluster, and it monitors all new pod launches. When a new pod is launched, it connects to the init container, injects a token, then the init container completes and it goes on about its business. But it injected a token, and that token corresponds to a role within the Vault. So it effectively gives it access to a key as a specific role in the Vault, and there's a policy there to set that up. That's how it works. It's not the same as an identity, but it might be a workaround that is useful for him until they can find another solution there. But I definitely think down the road, Spiffy is going to be the solution there.
Okay, we're down to our last three questions. Let's see. Michael Leaves asks, quick kubectl question if there's time. Is there anything like label selectors but for annotations, or another nice means of finding resources by annotations?
No, they're specifically designed so they're not like that, and you can put more information in them.
Okay. Any other? Okay, that was straightforward. Dan asks, quick question. Argo CD seems very promising. Any chance you'll integrate with Garrett? And you answered this, but I just wanted to get it on the video.
Yeah, so as long as it supports a Git protocol, either SSH or HTTP, it should work. What won't work is if it has a custom webhook, we won't get the immediate notifications, but we have a 3-minute polling interval, so we will notice within 3 minutes that something changed.
Sure. And then last question, Salvador asks, how do I know if liveness probe is killing my pods? And it looks like Michael Eves asked this one. It says kubectl get events should give you the good info.
And then if you describe it, it should tell it too. Because it'll give you the relevant events.
Uh-huh. All right, and with that, we're almost to the top of the hour. I want to go ahead and wrap this up so we can give the audience a T-shirt. Bob, if Jeff isn't here, how do we give away a T-shirt?
Give me 1 sec.
If not, I'm going to close my eyes and just point to my Slack screen and then pick a randomized one. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We do this every month. It's always the third Wednesday of every month. We have a session earlier in the time for Europeans and a session later in the day for the West Coast. If you're interested in doing these in a time zone, we have how to do this all written down. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us. This is like a world record in the amount of panelists. Thank you. Do any of you have final comments before we give away the T-shirt or something cool you're working on at work that you're excited about? Here you go. Oh, here we go. What's your favorite 1.14 feature? Go.
Yeah, I think we're not all up to speed on 1.14 features. Maybe not the greatest question. Maybe
Josh is like, no more meetings. Yay.
Yeah, the release notes dashboard, the release notes tool.
Yeah, so the release notes will look nicer for the end users from now on, right? I know there has been a lot of work in the tooling. What else, Josh? Is there anything cool? Just tell us something cool while we stall for time while Bob
I already got
runs his Perl script. Oh, okay. All right. Here we go. All right. Who's our winner today?
Chapman.
All right, Chapman. If you're on, I will ping you. I will PM you in Slack and give you a code to the CNCF store. You can always go to store.cncf.io and pick up your favorite Kubernetes T-shirts. Not this one because you have to go to KubeCon for that one, but there's lots of good stuff there. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists did y'all have a good time? Was this like fun?
Yep.
Yeah, this was fun.
Excellent. Thanks for putting on, George.
Awesome. So we will see everybody next month. We're changing it up how we're doing. So each actual event will have a unique YouTube URL now. So you'll be able to subscribe to it a month ahead of time. I'm going to schedule all those for next month tomorrow. So you can set your little reminder, whatever device you're on, we'll ping you on YouTube and you can follow along. And with that, we're going to end. Panel, stick around after I kill the stream here. And then Chapman, I will follow up with you and get you your T-shirt. Thanks everybody for listening and have a great day.